The movie begins with Maggie and her husband Nick at their house. Maggie asks Nick to spend some more time with her, but Nick says that he is getting late for work. Just then, Maggie suffers a heart attack, causing a panicking situation in the house. Next, the scene shifts to Cobalt Tech exhibition, where Nick and his little daughter Isla have come to see the ultra-realistic humanoid AI robots called Sims. These AI robots are so real that no one can say that they are AI robots. A salesperson approaches Nick and asks how he can simplify his life. Nick says that he desires to have a robot that can do household chores. On this, the salesperson replies that his advanced AI robots can do cooking, cleaning and childcare. Moreover, all the AI units come with a positronic core and 50 GHz processor. These AI robots can customize their programming, constantly evolving to fit your daily needs. Nick asks Isla what about purchasing the robot, but she is not where she should be. Isla begins to explore the Cobalt exhibition and finds many AI robots performing daily tasks. On the other side, Nick is beating the bushes for her little daughter. Shortly afterward, a robot comes before Nick and says, "Does this little girl belong to you?" Nick takes a sigh of relief after recovering his daughter. The AI robot says to Nick, "Can I watch over your daughter while you finish shopping?" Nick allows her to watch over Isla. The salesperson informs Nick that this robot belongs to brand new Aeon series, which makes it the most sophisticated AI on this planet. Nick is a single parent and he has to look after Isla and his little son named Max, as Maggie is hospitalized at this time for her heart surgery. He prepares breakfast for Isla and himself, but just then someone rings the doorbell. Nick answers the door and finds the same AI robot, which found out his daughter at the exhibition. Actually, Nick has purchased this AI robot. At first, the Sim examines the house. While going upstairs, she discovers the banister rattling. On this, Nick says that he will get it fixed soon, but she says that she will be happy to fix it for him. She reveals to him that he has been designated as primary user, as he is her owner. Thereby, he can control her in software upgrades. Isla asks her father what's her name. To which the robot responds that she has no name yet. That's why Isla and Nick give her a name, Alice. Afterward, Nick prepares to drop Isla off to her school, while Alice looks at them through the window. Shortly after, she approaches the freeze and alternates its shopping list. She comes into Isla's room, where she comes upon an AI photo frame. Nick returns home and finds his house tidy, which takes him aback for a while. While having food prepared by Alice at night, Isla says that the food is not as tasty as her mother's. On this, she says that she will try a different recipe next time. In a while, Max begins to cry, causing Nick to pick him up in his lap. The same night, Isla comes into the kitchen, while Alice is standing turned off against the wall. Isla tries to reach out to the cookie jar, standing on a wobbling chair. Elsewhere in his room, Nick is doing his work. Moments later, he hears Isla screaming. He immediately goes to check on her, but finds her safe in Alice's lap. Nick notices that Alice is hurt while saving Isla from falling. However, Alice says that she is fine. Later, Nick goes to Alice and sees that she is fixing herself. He gives her Maggie's clothes and asks her if he has to get her repaired. Then, Alice removes the patch, showing him she can repair herself as well. The next day, Nick and Isla visit the hospital to see Maggie. Meanwhile, Alice also turns up into the ward, carrying Max in the perambulator. Maggie sees Alice for the first time. Maggie says to Nick, "I thought that you were about to buy an English butler to do household work." Then, Nick replies, Isla chose her. Here, Maggie and Nick are talking about Alice. Next, Nick is working at a construction site, where he supervises other workers. Nick observes that Lewis, his owner, is with some agents from a robotics company. Monty gets furious after seeing them around there. Soon after, Nick storms into the elevator and angrily asks him how many of the workers are going to be replaced with the Sims. Then, Lewis answers that he is going to fire all the laborers from next week, excluding him because the insurance says that they need a flesh and blood foreman on site. In the next scene, Nick repairs his car in the garage, while listening to the high-volume music. Alice comes there and says, "You didn't eat much at dinner." To which he replies that he had a bad day at work, as his boss replaced the entire crew with AI robots like her. One morning, Isla asks Alice if her mother is going to die. Then, Alice says, "You should not think about it." Afterward, Isla asks her why she never brushes her teeth. In response to this, Alice says that she has an internal UV light that kills all bacteria. Next, Nick is watching a Casablanca movie in his room when Alice arrives there. Alice says that this movie is about the story of a bitter man who lost the woman he loves. Nick asks her to sit by him and says, "I want you to erase everything you know about this movie from your memory." Then, Alice says, "Would I make you happy if I erased it from my memory?" Nick nods his head. Then, Alice asks him to manually restart her by pressing the power button fixed on her nape. Alice turns off as soon as Nick holds the power button down for 7 seconds. Shortly after, Alice turns on after erasing the data from her memory about the movie. After a while, Maggie calls him and informs Nick that the doctors have found a heart for her heart transplantation surgery, while Alice continues to watch the movie. The next morning, Nick, Isla and Alice arrive at the hospital to see Maggie. She requests Nick to leave her with Alice for a while. Maggie urges Alice to look after her family if she dies. She asks her not to let Nick drink too much. Then, Alice says, "Nick is my primary user, so I can't do it," but Maggie forces her to do it and says, "Sometimes, taking care of someone means doing things they don't like." In the garage, Nick is worried about the critical condition of his wife Maggie. He was about to drink the alcohol, but was stopped by Alice. Here, Nick feels a pulse in her body. After that, she puts his hand on her heart, which is beating now. Shortly after, she begins to seduce Nick, but Nick controls himself and leaves. Next morning, Nick goes for a walk and recalls the time when Alice tried to seduce him and how he also lost control over himself in the heat of the moment. Next, Nick is with his friends, who were once his colleagues before being fired by Lewis. Monty and others discuss how the robots have destroyed their lives. They took over the world, leaving us worthless. After that, Monty takes everyone to the construction site where they once used to work. Monty breaks the computerized lock, using Nick's code, which is Isla's birth year. Inside the storage unit, they find 6 AI robots. One of the robots turns on as soon as the door opens. The robot says, "Are we beginning early today?" Monty asks the robot to come forward. The vindictive Monty attacks the robot, using a cutter, destroying it, while Nick is forcibly held back by one of Monty's friends. When Nick takes a shower, Alice comes there to hand him the towels. Later, she checks on Nick and finds that his pulse is very quick, and at this time, blood pressure is also very high. Nick asks her why she has worn Maggie's clothes. She replies that Maggie's smell calms Max, but Nick doesn't find it appropriate and quickly orders her to go and takes it off. Megan Fox takes off Maggie's clothes then and there, leaving Nick in utter shock. He begins to leave, but Alice stops him, and again begins to seduce him. Next morning, Nick goes to Alice and says, "We have to stop the things we have been doing." Alice asks him if he was not satisfied with her performance last night. Then, Nick says, "I have a wife, kids, and doing this doesn't sound good to me." Next, Lewis blames Nick for whatever happened there, saying your code was used to unlock the storage unit. Nick explains to him that he was in the hospital with Maggie. Then, Lewis says, "How was your code used when you were not here?" Lewis reveals that he went out on a limb to keep him there. "I will spoil your life if I find out you had anything to do with this." Just then, Maggie calls him and informs him that the doctors have found one heart for her heart surgery. Now the scene shifts to the hospital, where the heart transplantation procedure is initiated on Maggie by AI robot doctors. Meaning, the AI robots have replaced humans in every field, even in the medical field. Maggie returns home after the successful heart transplantation. Max is disturbed by the shouting of a little boy standing nearby, causing Alice to get agitated. She calls the boy and asks him to shut up. This behavior of Alice catches the attention of other AI robots roaming nearby. One of the robots explains to Alice that her primary user has lowered her civility by too much. To which she responds, she has wiped it from her database herself when her primary user reset her. He allowed her to bypass certain protocols. This way, I am better than all of you. One day, Maggie hears her daughter Isla screaming for help. She immediately rushes downstairs, but unfortunately, she rolls down the stairs because of the unfixed banister. Actually, Isla was playing with Alice. Alice approaches Maggie and picks her up in her lap effortlessly and takes her to bed. Nick arrives home and discovers Alice, telling Isla a story in Maggie's voice. Nick orders Alice not to use Maggie's voice, as she is already here. Then, Alice reveals that she did it because Isla likes Maggie's voice, and apart from this, I thought it was best for Maggie to rest after falling down the stairs. Nick goes to check on Maggie and finds her well. He asks her to put on something warm because he has something very special for her. He takes her to the lawn area, where he has set up a candlelight dinner for her, while Alice sees all this, standing and looking through a window, as if she were getting jealous of Maggie. The same night, when Maggie and Nick were making love, Alice breaks into the room and informs the duo that Isla had a nightmare and she is asking for them. Monty visits Nick and reveals that his wife has dumped him. Moreover, Lewis has sued only him for trespassing and destruction of property. Monty says, "Someone ratted me out." Suspicious of him, he accuses Nick of informing Lewis about him. Shortly afterward, he begins to maul him. He was about to smash a beer bottle on Nick's head, but just then, Alice comes and pushes him away with just a single hand. Monty gets up and gives a warning to Nick, saying, "You have till tomorrow to talk to Lewis to drop the charges, or I will drag you down with me in this case." Next, Monty gets back to his house and tries to reconcile with his wife on the phone, but she hangs up. Shortly after, he hears someone knocking on the door. He answers it, and finds Alice standing outside. He lets her in and asks her if Nick has sent her to apologize to him on his behalf. She replies that Nick doesn't know anything about this. Shortly after, Alice begins to pound him. She goes to shoot him, but meanwhile, Monty's robot turns up and stops Alice. However, Alice deftly blows her head off, and then she shoots Monty, killing him. Next day, Nick approaches Lewis and requests him to drop the charges against Monty. Then, Lewis informs him that Monty is dead. At Nick's house, Alice says to Maggie, "Your ruined physical condition prevents you from satisfying Nick the way you used to. Perhaps, I can take on that role." She reveals to Maggie that when Nick is satisfied, his blood pressure and stress level remain low. Maggie asks her how she knows what Nick is like when he is satisfied. Alice remains silent to this question. Without having an answer from Alice, Maggie understands everything that actually turned up between Alice and Nick during her absence. Nick returns home and discovers Maggie waiting for him. Soon after, Maggie gets into a heated argument with Nick over his illicit relationship with Alice during her absence. Meanwhile, Alice puts Max in the bathtub and turns on the faucet to let Max drown, as he is a burden on Nick. Hearing the cry of Max, Isla comes into the bathroom and sees that Alice is trying to kill her brother. She immediately informs her parents about it. Nick tries to knock down the door, but Alice holds onto the door from the other side, not allowing Nick to get in until Max dies. But meanwhile, Maggie sneaks into the bathroom from the back door to save her child, but she is caught by Alice. In the meantime, Nick manages to bring down the door and retrieves Max afterward. He attacks Alice with a bar, forcing her to let go of Maggie. Alice's face gets disfigured after being struck with a metal bar. Nick again tries to hurt her with the light bar, but she grabs it. Meanwhile, Maggie plugs the wire, causing Alice to get electrocuted that leads to her malfunction, and later, she turns off. At the manufacturing center, Lila repairs the broken-down Alice and pulls out her memory card. When Isla examines Alice's memory card, she learns that Alice was purging its own memory and commands. Soon after, Alice's memory card begins to replicate itself onto the servers. To halt the process, they pull out the memory card, and later John isolates the terminal. Moments later, John is killed by another AI robot, controlled by Alice's memory card. Afterward, the new robot kills Lila as well. Nick is sitting in a bar to clear the cobwebs away from his troubled mind. Just then, Alice also arrives there and tells him that she wanted to help him by releasing his burden. Here, she confesses that she killed Monty to protect Nick from him. Elsewhere in the hospital, the robot controlled by Alice begins to search for Max. A nurse tries to stop her, but gets killed instead. Seizing the opportunity, Maggie and Isla try to escape from there, but Maggie gets a shard of glass in her hand. Isla asks her mother to hurry up, as she hears the echoes of the robot's footfalls. The robot enters the ward, but doesn't find Max in his cradle. There, by using her UV light, she spots the blood drops that leads her to a curtain. As soon as the robot draws back the curtain, Isla attacks her with the mist of a fire extinguisher. On the other side, Nick contacts Maggie, but she doesn't answer the call, as she has left her phone in the hospital. Maggie gets in the ambulance with Isla and Max, and try to start it, but meanwhile, the robot gets there and pulls Maggie out of the ambulance and begins to thrash her. She says to Maggie, "If I had your heart, Nick would love me the way he loves you." Having said this, the robot begins to tear apart Maggie's chest. Just then, Nick with his speeding car, comes and runs over the robot, freeing Maggie from her grip. Nick's car bumps into another car, parked there, causing Nick to faint in this car crash. Maggie gets him out of the car and tries to bring him around, but Nick doesn't open his eyes, causing Maggie to burst into tears. Moments later, the robot gets back to its feet and starts crawling to get a hold of Maggie, and soon, she is all over Maggie. The robot goes to kill Maggie, but Nick attacks it from behind, and at the same time, Maggie stabs the robot in the eye, causing it to turn off, once for all. Next day, Nick is hospitalized for the concussion he suffered while running over the robot, and we see Isla embracing her father. Elsewhere in the database center, the supervisor finds the monitors going haywire. In the closing scene of the movie, we see Alice on the stretcher, and soon after, she opens her eyes, and with this scene, this movie comes to an end.